So with this very sublime poem by Swami Vivekananda, we are beginning the Symposium on the Life and Teachings of Swami Vivekananda. And in this symposium, we have three speakers speaking on various different aspects of Swamiji's life. The life was essentially a God-centric life, with so many different ways in which it manifested. And therefore it is interesting to see how the divinity in Vivekananda, in that apparatus, which has so many sides, so many ways of shedding that divine light to humanity, how it comes to us in various ways. So the three speakers for today's symposium, one is Chester Bonsek, whom you have heard here quite a few times, an electric engineer by profession and a devout student of Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda literature, as well as a practitioner in spiritual life. His inputs have always been very helpful to us. I request him to present his part of the symposium. That will be followed by Rohan Vakil. Rohan Vakil he has been growing with the ideas of Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda, a young student. You are junior, is it not? Junior at Bryan College, so in Rhode Island. So although his parents live in Massachusetts, we consider him a Rhode Islander. So, so he will be the next to join. And then third is Rituparna Bhattacharya. She also has been a student, a keen student, and also a good commentator, not from the podium or platform, a public platform, but in conversations. So I suggested to her that just instead of throwing your comments at us at random, why don't you give the benefit of your wisdom to many other people? So she has somehow agreed, and so she will be our last speaker in this symposium. So let us begin with Chester Bonsek.
Thank you, Swami. Good evening, everyone. Salutations to Swami Vivekananda. I thought I'd like to start this evening recalling a story from the Old Testament, the book of Exodus in particular. It's the scene when Moses was leading the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And they were wandering through the desert, and they moved a camp of thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people, and they set up camp at the base of a mountain. And Moses went up into the mountain to communicate with God, who was providing them the guidance at each step of the way. And he went up there for an extended period of time. And the people down below were getting concerned about him coming back, or whether he'd be coming back at all. And so they asked one of the other elders in the camp, well, let us make a god to worship. So they collected up all of the jewelry, all of the gold jewelry, and they melted it down, and they formed this image of a golden calf. And they started worshiping this golden calf as the god which was guiding them to safety. And so eventually Moses did come down from the mountain, and he saw this worship going on. He got furious. He was carrying the 2 tablets with the commandments that God had spoken to them, and he smashed them on the ground. And he said to the people, all of those who are with the one God, come to this side of the camp. And he gave an order to them. He said, God is telling me to tell you to go across this camp and kill all those who are not worshiping the one true God. And so they did that, and they slayed thousands of people. And then Moses said to them, well, for your acts, you have now made yourself priests in the service of this God. And so this one incident has given idolatry a bad name in the Abrahamic traditions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So imagine then, when we read in Swami Vivekananda, we are all born idolaters, and idolatry is good because it is in the nature of man. So my talk today comes from this little book, Swami Vivekananda. It's called Flashes from Swami Vivekananda. It's really not much bigger than a driver's license. But it's packed jam full of sayings with very potent and very spiritual ideas. Taken individually, we have to be careful because they really need some careful analysis and quite a bit of understanding the life of Swami Vivekananda to put them in the proper context. And sometimes within the book itself, some of the ideas seem contradictory to some of Swamiji's other teachings. For example, in his Raja Yoga and in other places, he counsels, take up one idea, make it your whole life. Be like the oyster in that parable, which comes to the surface of the ocean while the star Svati is in ascent, waiting for a raindrop. And when it collects that raindrop, it dives down and develops it into a pearl. So take up this one idea. He says, first hear, then understand, and then leaving all distractions, shut your mind to outside influences and devote yourself to developing the truth within. Take up one thing and see the end of it. And before you see the end of it, do not give it up. Only those who can become mad with an idea, those alone can see the light. And so being a group based on Advaitic Vedanta, how do we reconcile the following statement, which is in this book? He says, become a dualist for the time being. Forget Advaita. But then again, be able to take it up at will. So isn't that not counseling? Take up one idea and kind of go back and forth between these two? So we'll come back to this question shortly. But occasionally I have a chance to work with students and young children, and so I wanted to tell you about two students that recently I met. The first was a very energetic young boy. He very eagerly tells you about his accomplishments in life and his plans for the future. And just from a short interaction with him, I got the sense that, he seemed to have the whole world on his side, right? Sometimes we meet those type of people. Perhaps a future class president or a captain of industry or something, or maybe even like a future president of the United States. Well, the second boy had a much different personality. He was very guarded in his approach. Long pauses preceded each answer, indicating to me that he was weighing his thoughts very carefully. Never did he speak of hopes or dreams or even tomorrow. And his eyes to me conveyed a sense of perfect hopelessness. Okay. Now, since I've been studying Vedanta and these teachings, it has become clear to me, at least for those of us who differentiate the world into spiritual and secular, that spiritual values and spiritual norms seem opposite or contradictory in their nature compared to what we call secular norms or secular values. For example, we're told that reality is one, but we seem to see multiplicity. The spiritual counsels, serve thy brother and love thy neighbor. But the secular appears to be every person for themselves. Musicians and poets tell us it is better to have loved than lost, and that the pursuit of romance is what gives life its real meaning. In fact, I recall the words to a Broadway song which is quite popular. It says, what kind of life am I dreaming of? I say, give me that thing called love. I need it. Highs and lows, tears and laughter. Keep me happy ever after. Give me that thing called love. But yet the spiritual counsels only marry if you must. If possible, take up a monastic life. That is where the true happiness lies. And we see this not just in Hinduism itself. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7 in the New Testament, they say a man does well not to marry. But because there is so much immorality, every man should have his own wife, and every woman should have her own husband. Actually, I would prefer that all of you were as I am, meaning monastic. But each one has a special gift from God. One person has this gift, another a different gift. It is better to live alone, but if you cannot, go ahead and marry. And photographers and artists assert the aesthetic values of the world, beautiful scenery, flowers, the sky, and the mountains, while Vedanta asserts, shun the objects of the senses as poison. So such examples really show to us the contradictory or opposite points of this apparent secular versus spiritual laws. And so now let's go back to Swamiji's statement that idolatry is good, that we are all born idolaters. Taken alone, this statement is explosive and can be dangerously misinterpreted. As we've already seen from the opening story with Moses, this idea of idolatry is responsible for killings and wars, past and present. However, in the full context of Swami Vivekananda's writings, the words take on a different meaning. He says here, all of you have been taught to believe in an omnipresent God. Try to think of it. How few of you can have any idea of what omnipresence really means? If you struggle hard, you will get some idea like the ocean or the sky, or a vast stretch of the green earth. All of these are material images, and as long as you cannot conceive of the abstract as abstract, or the ideal as the ideal, you will have to resort to forms and material images. And of course, he's quite correct, right? And in fact, the fun of it is even the examples that he had given are really very finite in nature. I mean, if you stand on the seashore, the distance to the horizon where the sun meets the surface of the water is only about 3 miles. So it's roughly proportional to the square root of the height. So it's about 3 miles. That's why on the old ships, they had the crow's nest way up top so that you could get some advantage of height. And even the moon itself is only a 3-day drive away, as was shown by the Apollo astronauts. And even the farthest stars that we see are a fixed distance away. And so continuing from Swamiji's writings here, he said, who can get beyond this limitation of the infinite with finite images? Only the perfect man, the God-man. The rest of us are idolaters. So long as we see the universe before us with forms and shapes, we are all idolaters. This is one gigantic symbol that we are worshiping. He who says that he is a body, is a born idolater. And then he asks a provocative question. Is it not better to have a personal attachment to an image of Christ or Buddha than to an ordinary man or ordinary woman? We may worship anything by seeing God in it, if we can forget the idol and see God there. But we must not project any image on God. We may fill any image with that life which is God, for out of him comes everything. So perhaps that golden calf is not God, but perhaps, in view of this, God could be present in it. So now let me take you back to those 2 students that I talked about earlier. Perhaps after I described them to you, maybe after I talked about the first one, you felt a little bit glad or a little bit happy for that person. My feelings towards the 2 are a little bit contrary, I guess. For the first one, the one that seemed optimistic, enthusiastic, I felt a minor sense of sadness, actually. And for the second one, the one with cautious reserve, I felt somewhat happy. So what to make of these? See, the usual standard is to value hope. A hope for better tomorrow. Hope for world peace. And the word hopelessness, hopeless, is traditionally viewed as negative. It's usually assigned to someone who, from the point of view of the person using the word, seems to have no worth or no chance of ever improving. Or it's used to refer to someone who has severe depression or melancholy. So imagine when we read in Swami Vivekananda's book here, be perfectly hopeless. That is the highest state. Again, it takes, standing alone, it's a confusing statement. But he makes it clear on page 10 in this book that it's not the hopelessness of melancholy and depression that he's referring to. In fact, he says that melancholy is an almost insurmountable barrier. What he's talking about is the hopelessness of a true sense of desirelessness, which comes from wisdom of the spiritual. He says there in another verse, Vairagya is finding out that desires are but gilded balls of poison. And this idea of vairagya is explained in chapter 10 of a classic Vedantic works titled the Ashvatakva Gita, in taking chapter 10, verses 1. It says, having given up desire, kama, which is the enemy, wealth, artha, which is attended with mischief, in piety, dhamma, which is the cause of these two, cultivate indifference towards everything. And in the commentary to that verse, in a book that I'm reading by Swami Chimayananda, he says, a consummate sense of contentment can reach only a bosom emptied of all desires and passions. The self alone is real. This universe is false as a magician's show. Ashvatakva is advising here a student who is on his way to the portal of liberation. As the student enters higher states of meditation, the teacher wants the student to give up all of these limited goals of life, which of course had their initial blessings in their contribution to bringing the student to his present state of awakening. But in the last lap of the journey, he cannot accomplish the last great leap unless he gets tired of his mental preoccupations with the ideas and values, which were certainly valid in the earlier levels of ego consciousness. To a Vedantic student, passion is his enemy, inasmuch as they obstruct his final plunge into the deepest meditations. And so perhaps that is the worst or the real meaning of this whole concept of idolatry. In pursuit of the individual pleasures of the world, sometimes we tend to serve the false gods of our ego's desire, especially when such pleasures come at the expense or exploitation of others or the higher self. Remember the song that we saw a few minutes ago? Highs and lows, tears and laughter, give me happy ever after. But these words remind me really of the Upanishad story of the two birds. You have that one bird jumping from branch to branch, eating the fruits, sometimes sweet, sometimes bitter. But the one bird sitting at the very top, just observing the goings-on of that lower bird, until finally the lower bird looks up and merges and realizes that they're both one and the same. And so perhaps, too, we could say that, as Swami wrote, Viagra is finding out that desires are but gilded balls of poison. Perhaps we can say that the golden calf, too, was that which was keeping them from the promised land. And in the symbolism of the Moses killing, we see a similar thing in the Bhagavad Gita, too, where Arjuna positions himself between the two armies, seeing relatives and friends. Perhaps it's not people, but the kith and kin of our own pet ideas, the mental noise of our own desires, which are really the things that are keeping us from the highest vision. So then Swami answers the question how to get beyond it. He gives some very positive things. He says, the seeing of many is the great sin in all of the world. See all as self and love, and let all ideas of separateness go. The brotherhood or personhood spoken of in all religions comes about by gradually seeing and expanding our vision. He gives some hints as to the way to proceed. He says, the sum total of all ideas of help are God. Life is short, and the vanities of the world are transient. They alone live who live for others. The rest are more dead than alive. In the world, always take the position of the giver. Help, give service, give any little thing you can. Keep out barter. Our best work is done, our greatest influence is exerted when we are without thought of the self. You are best, you are real when you are not, when the little self is gone. Give as the rose gives perfume, because it is its own nature, utterly unconscious of the act of giving. Imagination will lead you to the highest even more rapidly than reason. See only God in every man, woman, and child. Read man or humankind. He is the living poem. And so the summary of the key ideas. We are taught that God, reality, truth is infinite, but it cannot be imagined. Any image of the infinite is a lesser truth. And it's from Swami Nikhilananda's book, Hinduism, Its Meaning for the Liberation of the Spirit. There's a very nice Vedantic verse there that summarizes this whole talk. It says, O Lord, in my worship, I have attributed forms to thee who are formless. O thou teacher of the world, by my hymns I have, as it were, contradicted thy indescribable nature. By going on pilgrimage, I have denied thy omnipresence. O Lord of the universe, pray, forgive me these transgressions. But because we are limited this way, Swami Vivekananda does advise, put down Advaita for the time being. Since we need up an image, pick up one that most closely takes us to the highest. Not the false gods of ego, money, or fame, but some holy form, which will gradually inspire us to see God's presence in all. And Swamiji's ideal was serving God by serving mankind. Now, from where do these insights come from? I'd just like to take that up. As long as we think we need something, we will always be someone else or trying to please someone else and a victim of other people's thoughts. Vedanta counsels that one way to achieve spiritual insight is from a life dedicated to the search for truth, wherever that search may lead. Wandering, not beholden to any society or convention, was the path taken by Swami Vivekananda. And he writes in this little book, truth does not pay homage to any society, ancient or modern. Society has to pay homage to truth or die. So now, in honor of Swami, the wandering monk, I'm going to have a video here. A couple weeks ago I gave a talk and I used a tape of a person from an audition show. I'm going to use another one here today. It's a 27-year-old woman singing a song which could have been written for Swami Vivekananda. It was not, but it kind of summarizes his life. It's called Wander Till the Day I Die.
Underneath the azure sky, I can keep on walking till my days on God's green earth are done. You might find me by the side of the road, in that old train yard. You might find me on the corner, a smile on my face, strumming on my guitar. Wander on through that pouring rain, through that Chicago snow. I'm gonna keep on wandering, Lord. I'm wandering till the day I die. Been out here wandering underneath an azure sky. I'm gonna keep on wandering till my days on God's green earth are done. I'm wandering, Lord, I'm wandering till the day I die.
Okay, so my salutations to Swami Vivekananda on this special birth anniversary, whose work and teachings have been very influential in my life, especially in my interest of the science of mind and Raja Yoga. His work is the reason that we're here in this brand new building, so my salutations to Swamiji.
I was always hoping to go first so that we could reduce my risk of following an excellent speech, so I guess you can't win them all. But hello everyone, I recognize most of your faces, probably recognize mine as well. My name is Rohan. I am a junior at Bryant University. I sat through more lectures than I can count. I've been coming around here or Boston or Marshfield since I was born. And I'll be the first to admit that I actually haven't read too much about the teachings of Vedanta or the message of Sri Ramakrishna. I'd much rather prefer to read a novel. So just recently I read The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. And in it, the main character, Stephen Dedalus, finds himself ridden with guilt and begins to pray every day and becomes incredibly pious, always counting on the rosary and praying 24/7. But then in the next scene, we see him at the dinner table with his family, and all of a sudden he just becomes engulfed in anger when his mom sneezes. So I guess this speech was a good opportunity for me to start reading a little more, and that's what I did, and we'll come back to that story a little bit. So I was told to speak at this symposium about the universal teachings of Vivekananda by Swamiji a few weeks ago. And I recalled my theology classes at Catholic high school. And I was speaking to Swamiji a few days ago about some of the things that I learned. And Swamiji asked me a series of questions that I guess I had never put any thought towards. And one of those questions was, Rohan, do you remember what Swami Vivekananda has to say about sin? Do you remember these from your lectures? And I thought for a moment and realized slowly that I didn't remember very many discussions about sin at all. And then Swamiji introduced me to the idea of universal ethics. And I found this topic interesting, and Swamiji gave me some food for thought and some books and articles to digest. So what does Swami Vivekananda have to say about sin? He says this 120 years ago this year. He says, "Ye are the sinners, ye are the children of God, the sharers of immortal bliss, holy and perfect being, ye divinities on earth, sinners. It is a sin to call a man so. It is a standing libel on human nature." Swamiji denied the existence of sin, and that it would be a sin itself to call another human a sinner. He was denying one of the central structures of Christian dogmas and all of Western religion. But think about his logic. All humans are divine, but we are ignorant. Sin, therefore, is not disobedience to God, nor is it disobedience to a divine law, but rather a personal loss. It is harm done to oneself. And why would someone do harm to themselves unless in a state of ignorance? So then, if it is our duty to live every day as a battle against evil, as Radhakrishnan, a philosopher and the second president of India, says, how does one judge what is good or evil? If we need to fight evil, how do we know what to fight if there is no basis for judgment because there is no sin? How do we fight evil if we do not know what is evil? We think we know what is good and evil, but can it really be so black and white? As most of you know, nothing is ever really black or white. A few days ago, when speaking to Swamiji, he postulated that even in a case where we are given antibiotics to cure an illness, you are actually simultaneously subjecting millions of bacteria to their death. And this is a very tame example. We have much more complex issues when we think of other hot-button bioethical situations. But the question remains, what is good? What is evil? How do we judge? And what do we do? One could look towards John Stuart Mill, who says, actions are right in proportion as they promote happiness, and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness, or doing the most good for the most people. But then, what is good? And does this necessarily outweigh the evil that might be done to one person? In the case of Stephen Dedalus, he was praying all day, but does that really justify becoming so angry at his mother for a sneeze? Vivekananda gives us something a little less ambiguous, a little more comforting, and a little more forgiving. The world is a grand moral gymnasium, wherein we all have to take exercise so as to become stronger and stronger spiritually. What Swamiji realized and argues is that we evolve and mature spiritually over time. Your judgments on sin and your ethical dilemmas and challenges are all part of a gym, and you're only getting stronger with every decision and with reflection of every decision. Perhaps it speaks to me more because I consider myself a little athletic and I like going to the gym. But I think that it is an incredibly positive message. The image of a journey that makes us stronger is much more comforting than the image of a complicated maze with weights and decisions to make at the turn of every corridor. What I'm trying to say is don't sweat it so much when making an ethical decision, but instead seek comfort in the notion that these decisions are a journey or a workout at the gym. Be patient, be calm, do good work, and run this like a marathon where you get stronger with every mile. One final comment that I would like to add with respect to this topic is that it is incredibly difficult. It is an incredibly difficult subject not only to read about, but to think about and explain. With every word that is spoken on this subject, or every situation that is used in context for the examples, you can find further complexities. In this speech, I mentioned the dilemma of what is good, but questions about what is life, what is living, what is more evil and less evil, what is the intent, and others make situations complicated and difficult to assess. But perhaps it is not our place to judge the actions of others, only to reflect on the actions and intentions of ourselves. Ultimately, it is not the action that is good or bad, but the intent. We move not from bad to good, but from truth to truth, from lower truth to higher truth. Thank you.
Salutations to Swamiji. Salutations. Good evening to all my friends and revered Swamiji. I feel immensely honored to address such a distinguished gathering on this auspicious day. By the grace of God and the blessings of the Swami Vivekananda, I will be speaking on practical Vedanta. Swami Vivekananda presented a series of 4 lectures in the month of November in 1896 during his second visit to London. It has been a beautiful journey reading the whole series of the practical Vedanta, and special thanks to Swami Yogatmananda because he insisted I speak on a topic and I chose practical Vedanta. It'll be hard to give a detailed insight of all the 4 lectures in the stipulated time, but I will try and attempt to present some of his lectures by his quotations. So let's see what the word practical means. Practical means something that you can practice. Now, with the word practical comes the other word that is called theory. In the words of Swami Vivekananda, theory is very good indeed, but then the question comes, how can we carry it into our daily lives? How can we carry it into practice? If a theory is absolutely impractical, it has no value. And then it can be just referred to as intellectual gymnastics or lingual warfare. Now, we know that powerful authorities in the past have spun wonderful logical theories and given birth to a whole system of philosophy. These were just theories without reason and actually posed dangers. Here's a brief example. In his lecture, Swamiji said, the Hindus believe that creation came out of the Vedas. He asked the question, how do you know there is a cow? Because the word cow is in the Vedas? Then he asked, how do you know there is a man outside? Because the word man is there? If it had not been, there would have been no man outside. So you see, it's better to have a religion that claims to have a reason than just have a mere theory. Swami Vivekananda rightly said, and I'm going to quote his words, exactly what he said in his lecture. He said, it's better to become a theist by following reason than blindly believe in 200 millions of gods on the authority of anyone. What we want is progress, development, and realization. No theories ever made man higher. No amount of books can help us to become purer. The only power is in realization, and that lies in ourselves and comes from thinking. So let men think. He also said that religion is a practical science, so practice it first, and knowledge afterwards. Vedanta has been a practical religion, immensely practical, and Swami Vivekananda has brought that out in a very powerful way. We shall now see how Vedanta can be carried into our everyday life, the city life, the country life, the national life, and the home life of every nation. I would like to discuss the ideal and goal of Vedanta. As Swamiji said, and we all know, Vedanta teaches oneness, or the unity of self. Every human being must have a goal and ideal in life. Vedanta says, that there are two tendencies in human nature. One is to harmonize the ideal with the life. And what it actually means is our tendency of temptations. It is the motive power of passion like anger, greed, or selfishness. For example, if you're presented with an ideal, and that ideal tells you to give up your selfishness and self-enjoyment, you think it is impractical because it does not suit your needs. But say if someone comes and gives you an ideal and tells you, okay, you can adjust it and keep some of your selfishness, you jump on it at once and you say, okay, this is practical, it suits me. Now, this is not the true essence of practical Vedanta. The other tendency of human nature is to elevate the life to the ideal. In one word, this ideal is that you are divine. The soul was never born and will never die. And all these ideas that we are going to die and afraid to die are just mere superstitions. I will quote again from Swami Vivekananda. He said, "Let the whole body be full of that one ideal. I am the birthless, the deathless, the blissful, the omniscient, the omnipotent, ever glorious soul. Think on it day and night. Think on it till it becomes part and parcel of your life. Meditate upon it, and out of that will come work." Now, a question was posed to Swami Vivekananda that how can we work if we do not have the passion that we should feel towards work? And to this he said, the less passion there is, the better the work. The calmer we are, the better for us, and the more the amount of work we can do. When we let loose of our feelings, we waste so much energy. We shatter our nerves, we disturb our minds, and accomplish very little work. That is why when a man becomes angry, never does a great amount of work, and the man whom nothing can make angry accomplishes so much. He only breaks himself to pieces and does nothing practical. So it is the calm, forgiving, well-balanced mind that does the greatest amount of work. And a beautiful example he gives is from the battlefield, where Krishna teaches his philosophy to Arjuna, and the doctrine which stands out luminously in every page of Gita is intense activity. But in the midst of that intense activity was eternal calmness. This is the secret of work to attain, which is the goal of Vedanta. And we all know from our experience in life that that is the best attitude for work. Another very important thing that practical Vedanta talks about is self-confidence and strength. Very important in our daily lives. Let's see what Swamiji said on that. He said, disease was found out as soon as man was born. Everyone knows his disease. It requires no one to tell us what our diseases are. But thinking all the time that you are diseased will not cure us. Medicine is necessary. Being reminded of weakness does not help much. Give strength. And strength does not come by thinking of weakness. The remedy for weakness is not brooding over weakness, but thinking of strength. We can do everything because we are everything. The Vedanta also teaches men to have faith in themselves first. We will take a quick look at what the Vedantic approach is towards a sin and a sinner. As Rohan wonderfully mentioned a lot about that, I will have a brief, saying on this. Especially in today's day and world, we don't get to hear too many good things, so let's see the Vedantic approach on that. The Vedanta recognizes no sin, it only recognizes error. What we call mistakes or evil, we commit because we are weak. And why are we weak? We are weak because we are ignorant. And who makes us ignorant? We ourselves. We put our hands over our eyes and cover the light and call it dark, and we weep. He says, teach men of the strength that is already within them. Instead of telling them you are sinners, the Vedanta takes the opposite position and says, you are pure and perfect, and what you call sin does not belong to you. We are all going towards the same goal, and most of our differences are just differences of expression. All differences in this world are of degree and not of kind, because oneness is the secret of everything. So friends, he says, condemn none. If you can stretch out a helping hand, do so. If you cannot, fold your hands, bless your brothers, and let them go their own way. Dragging down and condemning is not the way to work. Never is work accomplished in that way. Another beautiful thought from practical Vedanta is to let go and be free. Here Swamiji gives a beautiful practical example. He says that play your life like an actor on a stage and play the part of a beggar. He says, contrast him with the actual beggar begging on the street. The scene is going to be the same, but yet there is a difference. The one who is begging on the street thinks his beggary is suffering from misery. And the one that is playing a part as a beggar on the stage is free. And so the beggar who's acting is actually free, and the beggar who is begging on the street is bound. So the beggar who is acting thinks his beggary is not true, it is just for play. So the real beggar thinks this is a too familiar state. So long we know that we have no knowledge of our real nature, we are like beggars. We cry all over the world for help, but help never comes to us. We cry to imaginary things, and yet it never comes. We keep weeping, wailing, and hoping. One life is past, and the same play goes on and on. So why should you hope? Give up hope, says the Vedanta. Give up all these mad pursuits and then play your part in the universe as an actor on the stage. Freedom is your watchword. Then there comes another idea, is the idea of the forms of worship. He says that the other forms of worship are not errors. Swamiji says that those who worship God through ceremonials and forms, however crude we may think them to be, are not in error. It is the journey from truth to truth, from lower truth to higher truth. Darkness is less light, evil is less good, and impurity is less purity. So it must always be borne in mind that we should see others with eyes of love, with sympathy, knowing that they are going along the same path that we have trodden. Thus, practical Vedanta is a very conscious and deliberate way of life leading to realization of a true nature. It is timeless. True practical religion never changes. It is realization, not just talk, not doctrine, not theories, however beautiful they may be. It is being and becoming, not hearing or acknowledging. It is the whole soul becoming changed into what it believes. That is practical religion. Thank you, friends.
So I'm sure you all were with deep interest listening to this absorbing symposium. Very beautiful ideas, very important practical ideas came out of this. Chet told about the idolatry, what Vivekananda spoke about, that yes, we are born idolaters. And a lesson actually he learned at the feet of Sri Ramakrishna. He actually, in his college days, was waging a war against idolatry. He became a member of Brahma Samaj and signed a paper that I will not salute to any idol. And then later on, well, he writes this thing. And then let me quote another statement of his. He said that, you know, because I was having such wrong and adamant attitude about it, as a kind of punishment or whatever it is, I had to take all my spiritual learning at the feet of a person who has achieved everything through image worship. So that is, you can see, there one reminds about that wonderful statement of Persian Sufi poet Jalaluddin Rumi. He says that don't criticize idolatry, because when you think of idolatry, you already have made an image of God in your mind. So, what a beautiful statement. You already have first made an image of God in your mind. Dear Rohan spoke very beautifully about the various ideas about the ethics, that we have some absolute black and white images of good and bad. But then when we look at that from various perspectives, we realize that how relative and position-oriented they become. What is good for one person is not really good for another person. So it is not easy to take sides in that matter or to make judgments that those therefore ideas in Vedanta as presented by Swami Vivekananda, they are really providing a true criterion for judging what is a moral action and what is not a moral action. And we discover here that it is not the action as such, but the intent behind that action. The action and intention together decide the moral value of that particular person's attitude. And it is therefore an important thing that to judge what is moral, what is immoral. Vivekananda has at many different places written or spoken about the Vedantic ethics, and very illuminating are those thoughts. And then Rituparna spoke about a very important and constantly occurring theme in Swami Vivekananda's talks, the practicality. The Vedanta is a practical science. It is to be lived, and that what you have as knowledge must express through each and every action. Let me quote just to give some more emphasis to what Rituparna said. Speaking in Belur Math, just before he left for his second visit to America, he said to his close disciples and many closely associated devotees that look, at one moment you should be absorbed in deep meditation, next moment you should be ready to till these fields. He showed those fields, you should be ready to do that. One moment you should be absorbed in the studies of the scriptures and these abstract ideas. Next moment you should take all the produce in the field and take to market and sell it. There should be no conflict between these, because the life is one, the mind is one, and the greatest ideas have to be brought into our practice. As Rituparna nicely pointed out, that great statement of Swamiji, that as practical Vedanta, one should never try to drag the ideal down to make it practical, but one must conscientiously, with great effort, elevate our lives so that our life realizes the ideal. And so he has written in that Practical Vedanta a beautiful statement, which I remember about 40 years back, it struck with me with such force. He said that some people idealize the real, but Vedantists realize the ideal. So this is the message of Practical Vedanta.